Hey guys, and welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast, a true crime podcast featuring myself, Mandy, and my dear friend, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Yo, girl, what's up?
Yo, girl, what's up?
I never read reviews, but I did happen to see one when I was having to go on to change something. And it was like, Melissa sounds so monotone. She always has the same reaction at the beginning of the episodes.
Oh, is that the same review that said, why is the intro so fake?
Girl, it's so I can edit. I can find it so easy. I literally look in the thing for the words, dear friend Melissa, and I'm like, all right, I can start lining things up now. So I've just messed myself up. I hope they're happy.
I hope they're happy too. But also, they're
hey, girl,
correct.
What's up?
The intro is absolutely fake. We don't actually address each other like that. It's an intro for the podcast that everyone, well, apparently not everyone, but I feel like most people have come to know and love the intro. We have people write to us all the time and they say that they can say it word for word and they can hear it in their head because it's always the same. So there you go. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah. Can't have it all. Or you can, but it ain't going to happen to me. Okay, let's not do this.
All right.
Mandy, before we get started on the episode, just a reminder, this is the Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this campaign we're doing, we partnered with Navigating Advocacy to put together bags to bring to local shelters. So if you've thought about it, you're not quite sure, want more information, it'll be in our show notes, and we're working on putting our bags together this weekend to donate. So it's just like odds and ends, things that they need in these shelters. It doesn't cost a lot of money. If you're able to do 10 bags, wonderful. If you can do one bag, that's great. Anything is helpful. So if you do that, please let us know. Tag us if you do it on social media. We would love to see that and share it.
Yeah. So as Melissa was saying, we are back with our fifth and final episode for the month of October, and it truly, truly has been such a privilege. I speak for both of us when I say that, to be able to share some really impactful stories this month as we've been addressing the topic of domestic violence. We've shared so much with you all in the hopes that some of this information might reach the people who need to hear it, and that together we can work to prevent domestic violence and end the cycle of abuse. This week, we're telling another story that hasn't received a lot of coverage, but it's a story that touches on some different but equally important aspects of abuse and the way reports of abuse are investigated. Today, we're telling the tragic story of Andra, or Andee Adams, a 27-year-old woman who was killed after being struck by her boyfriend's car. But despite there being reasons to believe that Andee and her boyfriend may have been in an abusive relationship, Andee's death was ruled an accident. Her mom, Lilith, has been on the difficult journey of advocacy and has been sharing the story through social media platforms like TikTok in a fight to prevent other women from facing a similar fate as Andee. Haley was actually connected to Lilith through the mother of Megan Kiefer, whose name might sound familiar. That's the young woman whose story we covered last week. Megan's mom, Bevan, actually suggested that we work with Lilith to tell her daughter's story as well, and we are just so beyond thankful for the opportunity to do that.
Before we go any further, I just remembered we got an email from a Bevan, not this Bevan, but a Bevan whose mom lived in the same area, who named her after a Bevan that used to babysit her. And there's a chance it's the same Bevan because I don't think there's that many Bevans.
Oh my gosh. You'll have to give me an update on that. That is definitely something I want to know more about. Okay.
Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh. So anyway, and Bevan was just wonderful and so helpful with sharing Megan's story last week. But for this week's story, we're discussing Andra Piper Frances Adams, better known as Andee. She was a force of nature with a firecracker personality. She was an Indigenous woman born in Halifax, Nova Scotia on January 8th, 1993, to her parents Dawn and Lilith. Andee had a twin brother, but she was the oldest, and she would never let anyone forget that. She actually came into the world 27 whole minutes before her brother Ryan did.
That would be me as a twin, 100%. I would be the twin that would be like, I'm the oldest. I am the oldest.
I absolutely know that about you. But later, Andee and Ryan got another sibling, and the three of them were really all very close growing up. Andee's parents split when she was 6, but the separation dragged on for years before it was finally complete, and Dawn and Lilith were able to become amicable. But they didn't really communicate outside of those necessary parenting conversations. But Andee was really always the glue of the family, and she had a gift for bringing people together. She acted as a mediator in family situations, and she really always saw the good in everyone. She was the kind of friend people could count on and someone who was known as being fiercely loyal, so others were very comfortable opening up and sharing their secrets with her. But Andee was a very multifaceted woman who had a personality for days. She was also known for being a creative powerhouse. She lived for artistic expression, from painting and drawing to making clothes and experimenting with wild hair and makeup. And Andee was truly beautiful inside and out. When it came to Halloween, that was her time to shine. She was a big lover of the spooky season, and she attended every zombie walk in her town and would even do makeup for others. She was even eventually coined the Halloween Queen.
Love that.
Yeah. Her love of all things artistic extended to tattoos. She loved giving them to friends and family, and she even tattooed herself on a regular basis. She gave friends and family members a stick and poke tattoo of a Wi-Fi symbol to represent their connection. I love that.
That is so just genius, because I would see someone with a Wi-Fi tattoo and be like, what is that all about? Why do you have that? But then that explanation is like brilliant.
Amazing. I love it. But this tattoo really became a running joke after Andee accidentally gave her mom Lilith a crooked version of the tattoo, which is something that Lilith still laughs about to this day. And when people spot Lilith's tattoo, they'll sometimes ask her, "Are you Andee's mom?"
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Lilith and Andee had a deep and special mother-daughter connection, and Lilith was truly her daughter's biggest fan and supporter. She always encouraged Andee to embrace her quirky and artistic side. Andee had a very eclectic taste in style and music. Her favorite genres ranged from hip-hop to alternative indie, and she would always be seen with her headphones on, often while she was roller skating or hula hooping, which were things that she really enjoyed doing and helped her manage her anxiety. Andee's parents both had separate radio shows, so she grew up having extensive knowledge about radio and would often appear as a guest on her dad's show. Lilith even thought that Andee would probably end up working in radio herself. She had volunteered on a campus radio program and eventually earned one of the very few paid positions there, but then she started dabbling more in painting and just exploring other aspects of who she was and what she liked, and just figuring out what exactly she wanted to do with her life. Andee was involved in many different communities, including the LGBTQ plus community, as an openly bisexual woman. Her big personality and fun spirit later led to her mom and some of her friends encouraging her to apply to be on Big Brother Canada, which, if you've listened to our show for a while, you know that I used to be a very big Big Brother fan.
Yeah.
So I found that very cool.
So cool, yeah.
My husband and I have even had that conversation, like, would you go on Big Brother or would you not go on Big Brother? My husband says that he would. I think that he would actually be a great contestant on Big Brother.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do it because I don't want to be filmed 24/7. I just need my space to be able to get away. And I feel like you can't truly get away if there's cameras on you all the time.
You think you need your space? Imagine me in that house.
Yeah, you would not enjoy that at all. Mm-mm. Yeah. But in true Andee fashion, she showed up for her Big Brother audition in a pink fur coat, and she quickly stood out and grabbed the attention of the producers. She actually made it to being a finalist for the show, but she ultimately decided that she didn't want to be locked in a house full of strangers with different personalities, and she declined to appear on the show. But how cool is that you made it to being a finalist? In 2019, Andee connected with a guy over Instagram who had a similar taste in music. His name was Dustin, and he was from Seattle, Washington, where he worked as an electrician for a large company. Andee's friends in the LGBTQ plus community were somewhat surprised to find out that Andee, who had mostly dated women, was now dating a man. And Andee seemed even more reserved about sharing the details of this new relationship with those closest to her, including her mom Lilith. Nobody really knew a lot of information about Dustin. But a few red flags did start to pop up, and Andee's friends and family really started to feel kind of put off that they hadn't met him in person. But yet, things did seem to be moving forward with his relationship with Andee.
Andee went to visit Dustin for the first time over the 4th of July in 2019. This was actually supposed to be just a weekend trip, but she ended up staying longer. Much longer. She actually didn't return to Nova Scotia until December of that year. But still, nobody closest to Andee knew much about her time in Seattle or her new relationship or even about Dustin in general. By February of 2020, Andee was ready to see Dustin again. He bought her a plane ticket to come visit, and she packed a small bag of clothes and really enough for maybe a weekend away. The bag she packed was too small to even carry all of her makeup in, so her family and friends assumed she wouldn't be gone for longer than the weekend.
Of course, this is someone who's very into, as we said, using makeup and hair to, express herself artistically. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect her to go too long or too far without much of, many of her belongings.
Right. But then, as we all remember, the world began suddenly shutting down as cases of the COVID-19 virus started popping up in large numbers across everywhere. The U.S.-Canadian border was closed, and Andee ended up getting stuck in Seattle. And this was really a turning point where things really started to change. Lilith noticed that Andee, who had always been this bold, confident woman who was unapologetically herself at all times, and someone that turned heads everywhere she went with her bright-colored hair, her vibrant makeup, and her unique sense of style, she was now really a completely different person. The eclectic outfits and bold hair colors and makeup that were always Andee's trademark look were a thing of the past, and now her look was muted and almost unrecognizable. Now she was wearing long sleeves, high necklines, and choosing clothes that covered up her tattoos that she once proudly displayed. She even traded in the fun hair for a plain blonde bob. Andee's family watched her transform on social media, and after a while, it felt like they were looking at someone else in the photos that Andee would post. They said her sparkle was gone, and she didn't look like the same expressive, artistic soul that she really was. Her family and friends thought it was as if her personality had just been drained right out of her. And of course, this made her mom incredibly sad.
According to Lilith, Andee was the type of person who really wouldn't tell you anything unless she wanted you to know about it. So Lilith said she didn't know too many details, but she did know that Andee had been financially dependent on Dustin since she arrived in Seattle. And that was because Andee didn't go to the U.S. on a work visa, so she wasn't able to get a job here, and that meant she was relying on Dustin to pay for things that she needed. But at times, Dustin would be kind of stingy with his money, and he would just refuse to buy her things, even things like feminine hygiene products. So Andee would then be asking her mom to send small amounts of money just to help out and get by. Lilith said it was always just $50 here, $100 there, but there really was no reason why Lilith would need to be doing that at all, because Dustin did make good money with the company he worked for, and he definitely had the means to pay for necessities such as tampons. According to the National Network to End Domestic Violence, financial abuse is a common tactic used by abusers to gain power and control in a relationship. The forms of financial abuse may be subtle or overt, but in general, they include tactics to conceal information, limit the victim's access to assets, or reduce accessibility to the family or mutual finances. Financial abuse, along with emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, includes behaviors to intentionally manipulate, intimidate, and threaten the victim in order to entrap that person in the relationship. In some cases, financial abuse is present throughout the relationship, and in other cases, financial abuse becomes present when the survivor is attempting to leave or has left the relationship. Lilith told us that she thinks the COVID pandemic actually created the perfect situation for Dustin to be able to manipulate and control Andee. He would make her feel like it wasn't safe to leave and go back to Canada due to the pandemic, even though the Canadian government had said that citizens could return. And this is actually kind of an interesting statistic that I feel like we're starting to get more and more information about things that happened during, the early days of the pandemic and just the different things that everybody kind of went through at one time. According to the National Commission on COVID-19 and Criminal Justice, domestic violence incidents in the United States increased by 8.1% following the imposition of lockdown orders. By isolating people in their homes, the pandemic separated potential victims from the network of friends, neighbors, teachers, and other individuals that would be capable of reporting signs of abuse and helping those at risk escape a dangerous situation.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of just another one of those, I guess you could call it, unintended consequences of,
sure.
and like I said, you don't find out really the true impact of things like that until years later, whenever they're able to go back and gather information and actually take a study about, different things that were affected. Andee's mom, Lilith, does think it's possible that Andee did realize she could go back to Canada, but the problem was that she wasn't able to because she didn't have money to get home. Lilith also believes that Andee may have asked her grandmother, that would be Lilith's mom, to help her get a ticket back home. But Grandma basically said, no, you got yourself there. You can get yourself back. We'll actually have more on Andee's grandma as the story goes on, so I won't say too much more on that.
Yeah.
As the summer of 2020 approached, Andee was still in Seattle, but she had become even more isolated and had cut off contact with her friends and family at home, which is a huge red flag that domestic violence could be occurring. Andee would send messages to her friends that said things like, just having a bad mental day, but she wouldn't really elaborate. But Lilith believes that Dustin was being abusive. She says she's not sure if the abuse was actually physical, but there are some photos that show bruises on Andee's forearms and one photo that looks like she has makeup over a black eye. Andee never told anyone that she was being physically abused, which of course, as we know, doesn't mean that it wasn't happening.
Right.
But one of the things that I feel is important to point out, especially in this episode, and I feel like you'll kind of understand that more as we get into it, is that we really want to focus on the fact that domestic abuse doesn't always have to involve physical violence. There are other forms of abuse, and all of them are unacceptable and none of them are okay. Just because you're not being physically abused doesn't mean that you're not being abused.
Right.
According to the organization called This Is Not an Excuse, domestic abuse can involve physical violence where an abuser harms someone, leaving visible marks and scars, but it can also be psychological, something that is referred to as coercive and controlling behavior. This type of abuse leaves no marks or scars, but can cause victims to experience fear and loss of freedom on a daily basis. The types of behavior associated with coercion or control can include isolating a person from their friends, family, and colleagues, stalking their movements, or controlling how they spend their time, monitoring social media accounts or tracking their mobile phone, making unreasonable demands, taking control over aspects of a person's life, such as where they can go, who they can see, what they can wear, and when they can sleep. The abuser may also deprive their victim of access to support services like healthcare and repeatedly put them down and tell them they are worthless. They may also take control of a person's finances, giving them an allowance or forcing them to take on debts. Another way that abuse can occur is through taking away food or limiting food, and this can be connected to other abusive behavior, such as telling someone that they are overweight. Using threats or intimidation to force a change in behavior or choices, including sex, is also a sign of abuse, as well as damage to property, destruction of household goods and valuable items, and other examples of abuse include preventing the victim from having access to transport to or from their job, coercive or controlling behavior that does not relate to a single incident. It's kind of just a purposeful pattern of incidents that takes place over time. And this is in order for one individual to exert power, control, or coercion over another. So these are, as you can see, there are so many different ways that abuse can occur outside of just what you might picture when you first think of domestic violence, which is often physical violence. But there are many other forms of violence that we all need to be aware of and look out for the signs of, for sure.
On the evening of Sunday, September 20th, Lilith got a call from her mom, who she's actually estranged from, and this is the same woman that we mentioned before, which is Andee's grandma. Lilith thought it was really weird that her mom was calling, considering they didn't really speak to each other, so she answered out of curiosity. Andee's grandma told Lilith that Andee's father had called her being the grandmother, the day before and told her that Andee and her boyfriend Dustin had been in a car accident and that Andee died. And you heard that right. Andee's grandma actually waited until the next day to deliver this news to Lilith that her daughter was dead.
I just don't think there is any way to understand the logic that went into that decision. I don't understand that.
I don't think there could be a reason that would make me understand. I don't think there's one thing that could make me understand how you couldn't tell somebody their child.
Right away.
As
soon as you found out. I mean,
the first thing you do.
Yeah.
Obviously, Lilith was shocked and she had a ton of questions, but the grandma didn't have any answers. So Lilith hung up with her and called Andee's father, Don. She hadn't spoken to Don in years, but he assumed that Lilith's mother had called her because, of course, you would assume you would call your daughter and say, by the way,
of course,
this terrible thing has happened. So Don was extremely distraught as he told Lilith that he wasn't quite sure exactly what was going on, but he said that on September 19th, he got a call from someone on the organ donation team at the hospital, but he was never notified by law enforcement or the hospital that Andee had been in an accident. He said he had been calling the police multiple times trying to get answers, but he was really getting the runaround and still didn't know much. Lilith contacted the police in Washington as soon as she could, and she found out that Dustin was in the car when Andee was killed. Lilith was confused because she thought that both Andee and Dustin were both in the car when the accident happened, but the police explained that there had been a quote-unquote freak accident and that Andee was killed while she was outside of the car and Dustin was inside the car driving. When Lilith asked about the autopsy report, police told her it wouldn't be ready for several weeks, which was also surprising because Lilith couldn't believe that they would label Andee's death an accident before they even had this autopsy report.
Yeah, that is kind of wild.
Absolutely.
That they would make those types of big decisions so early after this has happened without really having any information.
Right. So police reassured Lilith that Dustin was a good kid and that he didn't mean to hurt Andee. And of course, this actually infuriated Lilith because Dustin wasn't a kid at all. He was a 30-year-old man at the time, and his actions literally killed her daughter. Lilith got the sense that the police were on a mission to convince her that Andee's death was an accident, but it really didn't seem that way to her. She said Dustin nor his family even reached out to her or held any memorial service for her in Seattle. To this day, Dustin has kept Andee's belongings in his possession, including her phone and iPad, which Lilith suspects he would use to access her social media accounts after she died. Some of Andee's friends said they would see that her accounts were showing the active status after she died, and so they would send messages saying who's using Andee's account, but they'd never get a response. Lilith said she would do anything to have Andee's devices because that's where a lot of Andee's art is. Art that she had never even had the chance to see before.
Oh my gosh. That would just be so absolutely frustrating. The only thing that I can relate it to in my life is that after my grandmother passed away, it took me a very long time to get her wedding ring, which she had said that was supposed to be for me, but it kind of got lost in the family and was in different states, and I didn't know if I was actually going to get it. And it took me a while, but just that being so frustrated that you just want this thing so bad and the person won't give it to you. It's gut-wrenching to go through something like that. As soon as Andee's autopsy report was available, Lilith ordered a copy. When she read it, she learned that Andee's head and arms had been run over with Dustin's car, and she had multiple fractures, contusions, and hemorrhages to her head, as well as a fractured arm with abrasions and contusions. But the rest of the report really was not all that descriptive, and there were not too many details included. For example, the report said that Andee's nails were painted, but they didn't say whether there was any skin under her nails. And there were other strange things that stood out to Lilith in this report, too. Like, she noticed in the photos that Andee was wearing a bracelet that said Faith Doe, even though she was actually identified by her name at the scene by Dustin. And furthermore, when an unidentified woman is brought in, they usually will use the name Jane Doe. We've all heard of that, not Faith Doe. So it was all very bizarre that this was on the bracelet that was in the photos from her autopsy. Photos also showed that Andee had some kind of scratch near her groin, but that wasn't reflected or noted anywhere in the autopsy report. The medical examiner concluded that Andee's manner of death was a traffic accident. The report said, quote, "On September 19th, 2020, at 3:37 p.m., Andee and Dustin were in a vehicle and observed to have an altercation at the incident location. Dustin was in the driver's seat. Andee was in the front passenger seat. Andee was witnessed to exit the front passenger seat, walk around the back of the vehicle to the driver's side of the vehicle, attempt to enter either the driver's door or rear left passenger door, fall, and was run over by the vehicle. Dustin remained on scene and contacted 911. So this report opens the door to even more questions, and Lilith wondered things like, how did Andee fall and get run over by the vehicle? You know, she knew that Dustin's car was a Chrysler 300, and that's a vehicle that sits low to the ground. So Lilith was wondering, how did Andee's head get under the car to begin with? Lilith was frustrated with the inadequate autopsy report and the dismissive attitude of the police, as well as with the lack of communication from Dustin and his family. She was suspicious that Andee's death was more than an accident, so she requested all the files and videos related to the case. But for some reason, authorities refused to upload the case files to the portal where she'd be able to view them, and she had to jump through hoops to get them to finally do it. And this was a process that ended up taking 20 long months.
My gosh.
Yeah, and we have so much more to get into after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
This message is sponsored by Greenlight. Mandy, you and I both have teenagers and preteens now, and we're completely shocked. I'm still in shock over this. And while we've outgrown those nap fights and diaper wipes, we haven't actually outgrown the excitement about money. For kids, money is magical, but for adults, it's fleeting. And that's why it's so important to teach our kids about how to manage their money before learning from the school of hard knocks like you and I did. And that's where Greenlight can help.
Greenlight is a debit card and money app designed for families. Not only are you able to add money to the card when your kid needs it for a school event, but you can keep an eye on their spending and savings. So while they're learning financial literacy, they aren't just doing it all on their own. You've been there every step of the way since the beginning, and learning about money is just another step to get through together.
My personal favorite part of the Greenlight app is the chores feature. My sister and I were actually just talking about the summer chores that we used to have, including watering acres of grass at my parents' house. And our parents paid us by allowing us to live in their home. But really, I would have gotten through my chores so much easier and with a lot less complaining if Greenlight were around back then. My kids are very motivated by money, and so knowing that they're going to get paid every week on their Greenlight cards is really all the motivation they need.
Sign up for Greenlight today at greenlight.com/moms. That's greenlight.com/moms to try Greenlight today. Greenlight.com/moms.
Hi friends, this episode is brought to you by LolaVie, Jennifer Aniston's award-winning hair care line. Mandy, as the weather cools down, do you feel like your hair needs a little extra love?
Definitely. That's why I'm actually obsessed with LolaVie's new Exfoliate and Detox Scalp Shampoo. It's a 2-in-1 wonder that scrubs and clarifies, which gets rid of all the buildup that weighs my hair down.
Same. It's got activated charcoal, bamboo extract, and soothing ingredients like ceramides and B vitamins. And let's not forget that amazing herbal citrusy scent. It's like a mini spa day without all the spa day prices.
Exactly. And with their B Pro 3 bond technology, it's all about protecting your hair. Plus, it's easy to use with the precision nozzle, and it's clinically proven to increase hydration and volume after just one use. If you're ready to refresh your hair routine, check out LolaVie's Exfoliate and Detox Scalp Shampoo. I swear by it. If you ever use products in your hair, this one is a must-have. Trust me, your scalp will thank you.
Check out all LolaVie's products at their website at lolavie.com. As our loyal listeners, you'll get an exclusive 15% off your entire order when you use code MOMS15 at checkout. That's 15% off your order at lolavie.com with promo code MOMS15. Please note you can only use one promo code per order and discounts can't be combined. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Your hair will thank you. And now back to the episode. So before the break, we were discussing the information that Lilith, who is Andee's mom, is now finally getting her hands on 20 months after her daughter has died, and just trying to put together the pieces of what actually happened the day that her daughter died in Seattle, Washington. So for those 20 excruciating months, Lilith had no idea what happened to her daughter, and she could not understand how her death was ruled a traffic accident. During that time, she talked to many of Andee's friends and found out that they too had concerns about Andee in the months leading up to her death. Her friends had also noticed that she wasn't acting like herself, and some friends told her mom that Andee had told them that Dustin would accuse her of things and that he made her unhappy. Her friends said that towards the end, Andee was starting to push them all away. And of course, these things are a huge red flag to Lilith. Some of Andee's friends were also concerned and suspicious that the Seattle Police Department had determined that Andee's death was a traffic accident. Some of them actually reached out to the police department to voice their concerns, but they were brushed off and given the runaround just like Lilith. Although, of course, Lilith, it makes sense for her to be getting this information, not so much that a friend, that they're going to give this information to friends. But of course, Lilith should be getting this information where the friends shouldn't even need to call.
Right.
But remember Andee's grandma, Mandy mentioned her a little before? Well, she had no suspicions whatsoever about Andee's death, and she felt very satisfied with the police's conclusion that it was a traffic accident. And she further went so far as to defend Dustin. Of course, this ended up driving even more of a wedge between Lilith and her mother, and it would only get worse later on when she would learn that when the police actually called her mom to inform them of Andee's death, she only had negative things to say. And we're talking about her granddaughter. She finds out her granddaughter dies, and she doesn't really have a nice thing to say about her granddaughter.
I feel like right after you've learned that someone in your family has died, like that's a strange time to even think about anything negative.
Right.
Like it's just a very strange reaction to me that would be even at the front of your mind, that it would come out of your mouth, like to say negative things. Like that's the part that I just don't understand.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. And to add insult to injury, despite Lilith's attempts to get media attention on Andee's story, there were no articles written about her strange death. Reporters told Lilith that Andee's case wasn't really as newsworthy as other stories that were happening in the area at the time. One reporter did suggest that it could become a story if it turned into a situation where police misconduct was being exposed. So obviously, this is upsetting to Lilith, and she feels like Andee's death is being dismissed in favor of larger scandals. Finally, after waiting for 20 months, Lilith got a hold of the files she'd been waiting for. And these files were a mixture of reports, body cam footage, and interview footage that she was hoping would prove that Dustin had made a tragic mistake and that this really was a horrific accident. But instead, she discovered that there were some inconsistencies in Dustin's story. Inconsistencies that police had completely overlooked and failed to investigate.
Through the files, Lilith learned that in mid-September 2020, Dustin and Andee went to Seattle for a work-related class that Dustin was doing. They had arranged to stay at one of Dustin's parents' houses and to spend the evening of the 19th visiting with them. But instead, tragedy struck. At 3:39 p.m., the Seattle Police Department got a call about a domestic violence incident involving a vehicle hitting a pedestrian. Witnesses at the scene said they saw the couple fighting before Dustin's car ran Andee over. Officers arrived to find Andee lying unconscious in the street, bleeding heavily from the head and barely breathing. Dustin's gray Chrysler 300 sat a short distance away. Dustin was strangely calm. He was near Andee, but instead of trying to render any actual aid, he was just lightly stroking her arm. A woman who lived nearby had brought some washcloths outside for Dustin to use to help stop Andee's bleeding, but he wasn't using them when the police got there. Dustin was asked what happened, and he said, "We were driving, she hit me." As the officers worked to assess the situation and figure out exactly what was going on, Dustin picked up Andee's cell phone and stuck it in his pocket, and you can actually see him doing this in the body cam footage. He just reaches down, grabs the phone, and pockets it. And the phone was never recovered by the police. Members of the Seattle Police Department tried their best to stabilize Andee, who was eventually rushed to the hospital where she tragically passed away. Her mom, Lilith, believes that Andee was already brain dead by the time first responders got to the scene and that there was nothing that could be done to save her at that point. Dustin's initial statement was that he and Andee were in the car when they began fighting, and Andee got out of the car, ran around to the driver's side, grabbed the door handle, and fell to the ground as Dustin was driving away. He was calm and collected as he pointed out scratches on his neck that were allegedly from Andee. Witnesses confirmed the fight and said that they saw Dustin's car drive over Andee as she fell. As you can imagine, the scene was extremely chaotic, but Dustin was never placed under any type of supervision. He was allowed to be up and moving around freely, making phone calls, and he even contacted Andee's grandmother, which Lilith suspects that he likely did from Andee's phone. I feel like this part is genuinely, truly, I just cannot imagine why they would not have at least said, hey, you need to sit in this one spot and not have your phone or anything, because of the severity of the accident that has just occurred. Whether or not you think that he had any intent or fault in the accident, this is a very serious thing that's just happened. He was driving a vehicle that has hit a person who is fighting for her life right now in this moment. And it is very bizarre to me that they wouldn't have said, we need to contain you just temporarily while we get things under control here and figure out
Yeah.
what's going on. That part blew my mind, that he was allowed to just be up and walking around the scene as if he wasn't the driver of the car.
That, and he's already told the police that they were fighting. So we know that there's some kind of heightened emotions involved. And to admit that you're fighting right before an accident is not necessarily going to sound the best. And that also people called and said they saw them fighting before this happened. You'd think right there that is like tells the officers like there could be more to this. There might not be, but there could be, and we should treat it as such. In body cam footage, a responding officer can be heard speaking into his radio and saying, quote, "It looks like a domestic thing." Dustin continued to tell his version of the story, which was that the couple had been fighting in the car when Andee demanded that he pull over so that she could get out. He alleged that she grabbed him by the throat, which left scratches on his neck. So he pulled over and let her out and then immediately started to drive away. But he didn't realize she was going to run around to the driver's side and grab the handle. Dustin said that when Andee grabbed the handle, it pulled her and she hit the ground. So at this point, officers are thinking that Andee's injuries were caused by being jerked to the ground and possibly hitting her head when she fell. But they didn't realize yet that she had actually been run over. 2 officers at the scene can be heard talking about it on the body cam footage, and one says, quote, "I wonder if the car ran her over," end quote. They talk about how there are some witnesses there, but that some of them don't speak English, so they actually requested some other officers to show up, but apparently half the department was actually at a protest that day. At one point, an officer asks if the press was there, which they weren't. And Lilith thinks that once they realized that nobody was really paying attention to what was going on, that authorities stopped taking the investigation seriously. When Dustin was asked to elaborate more on what happened that afternoon, he told them that sometime after 3 p.m., he got to his friend Kaylee's house where Andee was already hanging out. He said when he arrived, Andee was intoxicated, but he said he had not been drinking. Dustin said he picked Andee up, and they got into a big argument which continued as they stopped at a gas station. Eventually, Dustin said Andee jumped out of the car at a stoplight and he continued driving because he said he had to. He was in traffic, so he couldn't just leave the car there. But he finds her at the gas station and she's mad and crying because he left her when she got out of the car. So the couple again start arguing, and that's when she grabs his neck and things went out of control and spiraled until Andee was ultimately pulled to the ground while trying to grab the door handle. Dustin said, quote, "She grabbed the handle and the handle pulled her down to the ground, and I immediately heard it and I pulled over immediately," end quote. Dustin said he was going 15 to 20 miles an hour as he drove off. He explained that he was just trying to do anything he could to get away from Andee and that everything happened fast. As we mentioned before, Dustin was allowed to walk around freely while police worked the scenes, and he was able to make several phone calls, including one to his and Andee's friend Kaylee, with whom Andee was with before the accident.
So this Kaylee person ended up showing up to the scene and was actually interviewed by an officer there. She said that she and Andee had been together since about 10:30 that morning when Kaylee picked Andee up and took her back to her place to hang out while Dustin was in his class. Dustin came to get her after he was done, and he hung out for a little while, but then the couple began arguing and things escalated quickly. Kaylee said she had to go run an errand at 3 o'clock, so she left the couple at her house, and when she got home, they were gone. Kaylee confirmed that Andee had been drinking that day, but said she didn't know how intoxicated she was. Interestingly, Kaylee immediately started telling the officer on scene that Andee had a, quote, mental disorder and that drinking made it worse. So she and Dustin would try to keep Andee away from alcohol, and they had even stopped drinking when they were around her. Kaylee said that day they were supposed to just have a fun little barbecue cookout and things went awry. The police told Kaylee that since the incident was domestic related, they would have to get detectives to come out and take pictures, measurements, etc. And Kaylee chimed in to just say that Dustin was the most patient, loving person she knew, and he was someone who put up with a lot, and she just wanted to make sure the police knew that the accident wasn't his fault. The officer kind of cut her off and said that, if they thought Dustin was at fault, they would have him in the back of a squad car in handcuffs. But as of that moment, they were just waiting for the professionals and experts to come out and do their jobs. The officer also said that they would need to wait for Dustin to calm down before they could interview him because he was so distraught. But the body cam footage that was taken at the scene actually doesn't appear to show Dustin being distraught at all. I did watch a little bit of it just to kind of see how his reaction actually was. And I wouldn't say he was distraught. He seemed like he was definitely in shock, but he wasn't. He was not distraught. The officer acknowledged that witnesses saw the incident and said that some homes nearby might have surveillance videos, but he said sometimes, quote, things just happen by accident. The officer continued asking Kaylee questions, such as where Andee's family was. And Kaylee told the officer that Dustin was talking to Andee's grandma, who Kaylee said basically raised her, which is a really weird thing to say because it's totally not true. I don't know where she got that from. But Kaylee continued to discuss Andee's mental state with the officer and said that she was schizophrenic and had manic episodes that she took a shot for every month. Kaylee said Andee was a great person, but that it was really up and down with her and that the issues usually stemmed from alcohol use. So Andee's mom, Lilith, told us that while she was aware of Andee's mental health struggles, she wasn't even sure exactly what her daughter's diagnoses were. So she thought that it was kind of interesting that Kaylee seemed to know Andee's exact diagnoses when she shows up at the scene. Interestingly, Kaylee and Dustin actually gave an identical story to the police, which, as you can imagine, has led Lilith to believe that Dustin called Andee. That was one of the people he called while he was roaming freely, unsupervised, and that possibly they discussed the story they were going to give to the police to make sure that it would be the same one.
Dustin told police that they should contact Andee's grandmother because she was the one who raised her and was her guardian, which is obviously not a thing since Andee was an adult and she did not need a guardian. And furthermore, she was actually raised by her parents and not her grandmother. Andee's mom thinks that Dustin may have lied about this to downplay Andee's independence and to frame her as someone who needed care, which only further fed into this idea that Andee was mentally unstable. At another point, Dustin told the police that Andee was half indigenous and that she could, quote, go from 0 to 100 real quick, end quote, which Andee's mom feels like is something he said just to slander Andee's character and make the police care less about her death. When the police did call Andee's grandmother, she also told them that Andee had battled mental illness and had a temper. She went on to say that she wasn't surprised to hear some of the details of the incident. Lilith thinks it was her own mother who played an instrumental role in making the police think that Andee's death wasn't important. The police never contacted Lilith or Andee's father, Don, to tell them about her death directly.
Again, mind-blowing. And honestly, that part is just unacceptable. Like that the police didn't even reach out to her parents, and even when her father was saying that he got that call from the organ donation team at the hospital
I can't imagine.
Before he even found out that his daughter was in an accident. I can't imagine a more horrifying situation than picking up the phone and them saying, can we have permission to take your child's organs? And I'm like, you haven't even heard about an accident at that point. Like it just, the fact that her parents were like so kept out of the loop about everything that was going on is just really, really unfortunate and really upsetting.
And you have to think if you get a call like that, it's a scam. Like that's what they literally tell you to look out for, things like that.
Shock value, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I just can't even imagine. After Andee passed away, the Homicide Unit and the Traffic Collision Investigation Squad, TCIS, otherwise known as TCIS, came in to investigate. And it was noted that the Domestic Violence Unit might need to be called, but they never were. The TCIS detectives looked over the scene, and one of the detectives determined that Dustin's car had actually driven over Andee, as one of the witnesses had said. They found pink threads from Andee's sweater in the tread of Dustin's back driver's side tire. The TCIS detectives took control of the investigation, while the homicide detectives took Dustin to the Seattle PD headquarters to be interviewed. Dustin sat alone in a room for quite some time, and while he was waiting, he could be heard on the security cameras talking out loud to himself and begging for Andee to be okay. When the investigators finally came in, Dustin told them that he and Andee had been planning to get married so that she wouldn't have to go back to Canada, but Andee's loved ones have a really hard time believing this. Her closest friends and family back home had never even met Dustin, so they were understandably surprised and suspicious that they were all of a sudden planning this wedding.
Dustin explained that on the morning of the accident, Andee was at home when he left for class early. Later that morning, she sent him a text asking for the address of the house they were staying at so that she could give it to Kaylee, who was planning on picking her up. Andee was then picked up and taken back to Kaylee's house, where she became upset at some point because Kaylee's boyfriend, Ryan, who's also Dustin's best friend, was allegedly acting inappropriately towards her. She said that he was hitting on her and being disrespectful. These allegations would later become more serious when Andee said that Ryan had raped her. Andee became more upset when she started to feel like Dustin didn't believe her and wasn't taking her seriously, and that led to a very heated argument. So to elaborate, Dustin's class had let out early, so it was around midday when he headed over to Kaylee's, and when he got there, he said Andee was visibly intoxicated and was already upset, but nobody really was able to explain why or what was going on or what had upset her. And after a while, Kaylee asked Dustin and Andee to leave. At this time, Dustin said that he drank a half a beer, which is different than what he said earlier, which was that he wasn't drinking. And then he told the officer that he took that beer with him when they got in the car to leave. So he says he drank half of it at Kaylee's house and takes the rest of it with him when they get in the car. He said that during the drive, Andee started screaming at him about Ryan's behavior, and the fight then escalated until, in this moment of frustration, Andee jumps out of the car at an intersection. He saw that Andee was walking towards the gas station, so he pulled back into the parking lot and waited for her there. While he was waiting, Dustin got a call from Ryan, but it's unclear what Ryan actually said during this call, and the police never asked for any details about it. When Andee got back into the car, the accusations intensified, with her calling both Dustin and Ryan a rapist. So Dustin said that he was confused because initially Andee was saying that Ryan, was hitting on her and she was uncomfortable, and now she has said that he's raped her. So Dustin said that he just was not even sure exactly what was going on and that he was very confused in this moment in this argument. At this point, he told her that they actually had to go back to Kaylee's to get the rest of the stuff that they left there so they could leave and go on to his parents' house. So they started driving back to Kaylee's while still arguing, and at some point, Andee scratched Dustin's neck, so he pushed her away, which led to her demanding that he pull over so that she could get out. According to Dustin, they both exited the vehicle briefly, but when he noticed that she was coming around to his side, he quickly got back in the car and he went to drive off. He said that he took off at approximately 15 to 20 miles an hour, and that Andee reached for the door handle at the same time he was pulling off, and all he saw was that she got jerked to the ground, and then he stopped immediately. Dustin said that when he opened his car door, he saw Andee on the ground, bleeding from the head. He then started yelling at the other people around to call 911. Dustin told the police that Andee was very intoxicated and was well on her way to being drunk. Toxicology reports later confirmed that Andee had an elevated blood alcohol level of 0.133, as well as her regular prescribed medications in her system.
After he shared his side of the story, detectives asked if they could look at his phone and read the texts that he was getting while he was in class. And these texts did show an obvious shift in Andee's tone. Even though Dustin had admitted to drinking and driving, the police didn't give him any type of alcohol testing, which is obviously frustrating in this situation where there's been a fight, one person's dead, and one person's alive. And of course, at the very least, they should have considered and looked into how alcohol may or may not have played a part in Dustin's role in the accident, but they didn't.
Yeah, 100%. That is, again, one of the many mind-blowing things that were just overlooked and mishandled in this case is you have somebody who has admitted that there was alcohol involved in this situation. This person was driving the vehicle, and it doesn't make any sense why you wouldn't just give them an alcohol test to see what their blood alcohol level is.
I mean, just from this, I'm assuming that whatever alcohol was in the car at the time of the accident, he brought it with him. So it doesn't seem far-fetched at all to say, we're going to run these battery of tests on you.
Absolutely. I would expect
it almost seems like it would help you.
Yes.
It would help you if you only had half a beer to be like, sure, absolutely, I'll do it. But they didn't even ask him. At the end of the interview, the detectives asked Dustin if he was aware of Andee's condition, and he said he wasn't. So they told him that she had passed away. Dustin left the room, and he could be heard on video wailing in the hallway. A detective then called Kaylee and talked to her for less than 5 minutes. She said that she did pick Andee up that day and took her back to her place where they played video games and did some art together. She said that Andee was drinking. Kaylee quickly dismissed the altercation between her boyfriend Ryan and Andee and said she didn't want to talk about it. Kaylee said that Andee had bipolar disorder and that her episodes would be much worse when she drank. She said that on this particular day, she just flipped a switch and got upset out of nowhere, and nobody knew what was wrong. She said everyone in the house was really confused by Andee's anger. Officers never spoke to anyone else at the house that day, including Ryan. When Andee's mom tried to reach out to Kaylee to talk, Kaylee blocked her on all platforms. In the end, though, even though there were some inconsistencies and things that were really unclear about Dustin's story, and even despite the fact that police were initially called to the scene for a domestic violence incident, Andee's death was ruled a traffic accident, and there was no further investigation. The final report says that Andee tried to grab onto one of the vehicle's door handles and then fell to the ground and was run over by Dustin's rear left tire. The conclusion was that, quote, this was nothing more than a tragic accident, end quote. And we still have more to get into after one last break to hear word from this week's sponsors. Okay, Mandy, so I have to ask, between all the holiday parties and family meals that come up in the next few months, is it just me, or do you walk around from place to place just feeling completely bloated?
For sure I do. It's like I'm trying to enjoy the season, but sometimes it's hard to even feel comfortable after eating.
I hear ya. And that's where Seed's DS-01 comes in. It's a daily probiotic and prebiotic designed to support your gut health and promote a healthy digestion routine, especially when life gets busy, like during the holidays.
Exactly. Seed's DS-01 is formulated with 24 scientifically studied strains to support your gut, skin, heart, immune health, and more. Just 2 capsules a day, and it's easy to incorporate into your routine. No fridge space needed, which is really a bonus when it's already packed with leftovers.
Totally. And it's not just gut health, it promotes overall well-being, like helping maintain regularity and reducing that heavy feeling after meals. I've definitely noticed a difference since I've started taking DS-01, and I love how it makes me feel lighter and more balanced. I've actually even gotten my dad to start taking it, and he's a total believer now too. So if you're looking to support your gut health and feel better throughout this hectic season, Seed's DS-01 is an effortless addition to your daily routine. Just 2 capsules a day, easy peasy. And listen, I do not miss a single day of taking my Seed.
Get ahead of the new year with a routine that helps you now by going to seed.com/moms and use code 25moms to get 25% off your first month. That's 25% off your first month of Seed's DS-01 Daily Synbiotic at seed.com/moms, code 25moms.
It's been a while since I've had a baby of my own, and some days I miss it so much. The baby cuddles and baby smiles, but when it comes to diaper rashes, not so much. I remember the first time my oldest had a diaper rash, I was really devastated. Here's this tiny thing totally dependent on me, and now she's fussy and obviously uncomfortable, and I'm supposed to have the answers. Well, with time and treatment, it went away, but what I really wanted was to avoid it altogether. And now, baby butts rejoice. New Huggies Skin Essentials are here, a brand new dermatologist-approved line of diapers, wipes, and pull-ups training pants, all designed with baby's sensitive skin in mind.
The wipes are thick and have 0 harsh ingredients for a great, gentle clean. Pull-Up Skin Essentials has got your big kid covered too, with a training pant that's ultra soft and breathable to help protect sensitive skin throughout potty training. Whether you're a first-time parent or a seasoned pro, make it easy on yourself and your baby with Huggies. Learn more at Huggies.com. Once again, head to Huggies.com to learn more.
And now back to the episode.
Before the break, we have been discussing a lot of the details of the tragic death of Andee Adams and how the police have ruled her death a traffic accident without really investigating that there could be some other possibilities. The authorities never pulled surveillance footage from the gas station that Dustin said they were at that day, and they never interviewed any of Andee's friends or family. Even though Dustin had told the police that Andee caused the scratches on his neck, they never scraped under her fingernails during her autopsy to check and see if she had any of his DNA under them, which would have proven or disproven Dustin's statement. Furthermore, the police didn't request for the medical examiner to perform a rape kit, even though Dustin told them that Andee alleged that she was raped. In the autopsy photos, Lilith noticed that there was a scratch near Andee's groin, which is especially concerning considering these rape allegations. So she asked the medical examiner why a rape kit was not performed, and the medical examiner said that the police never told her that Andee said she was raped. The autopsy revealed that in addition to the head trauma, Andee also had a broken arm, which Lilith says she really hasn't received an explanation for, and she wonders exactly when the injury occurred. She wants to make sure that the broken arm didn't occur before the car accident. The domestic violence unit was never involved, and Lilith feels like the police just wanted to kind of make the case go away rather than completing a full investigation. In fact, one officer wrote in his report on the day of the accident that Dustin was still being interviewed, but that no charges were anticipated. And of course, this was before the autopsy report was even ready. Lilith shared with us that at the time of Andee's death, the Seattle Police Department were facing many challenges, including protests and a shortage of qualified personnel, which impacted how cases like Andee's were handled. And anyone who was alive in 2020 kind of remembers the chaotic time that was, particularly in that part of the country. So I remember that for sure, and how I can't imagine how that must have affected investigations like this.
Sure.
The police chief at the time of Andee's case was later fired for assault, which, again, is very frustrating when you're already apprehensive about the way the police are handling your daughter's death, and then you find out that the guy who's in charge is not a great person himself.
Right.
Not to mention, Lilith was far, far away in Canada, so she thought that was just another thing the police, had over her, and they knew that they could sweep the case under the rug without any consequence. Anytime Lilith would share her concerns with the police about the investigation, they would just reassure her that Dustin was a good kid who he just came directly from his training class that day. He hadn't been drinking, and they kept asking Lilith why she wanted to ruin his life.
In the end, Dustin hasn't been charged with anything related to Andee's death, not even a lesser charge like manslaughter. Andee's parents have been left frustrated and really at their wits' end with how the Seattle Police Department handled the investigation, and they've even filed a complaint with the Office of Police Accountability, who then ordered an investigation. So the Office of Police Accountability, or the OPA, found a number of areas in the investigation that appeared to be incomplete, including the failure of investigators to review body cam footage taken at the scene, as well as failure to investigate what Dustin was up to earlier that day, or confirming that he was even at the training class that he said he was at. They didn't even verify details such as when he arrived at Kaylee's house, and they didn't have clarity on how long they were there before leaving. The OPA further found that police did not thoroughly investigate the dispute between Dustin and Andee, and that they failed to interview the individuals who were at Kaylee's house, including her boyfriend Ryan, who was allegedly hitting on Andee that day. They did not investigate the domestic violence elements of the case or refer those elements of the case to the domestic violence unit. Finally, they did not explore whether Dustin was driving under the influence, despite the fact that he openly admitted to having at least half of a beer. The OPA also found that 2 of the investigators failed to upload their reports to the case file in a timely fashion. Furthermore, all of the named employees in the report had significant experience and should have known to complete certain steps that they did not complete. The OPA said, quote, "While completing these steps likely would not have changed the outcome given the evidence, specifically because of the statements of the witnesses, it still resulted in an incomplete investigation that fell short of the standards governing the work of these detectives. Moreover, it appears to OPA that the named employees made a decision concerning the evidence very early on, and that because of this, they did not fully explore alternative theories or possibilities. This negatively impacted the quality of the investigation," end quote. However, after saying all of this, the OPA determined that there was no intentional misconduct that would warrant disciplinary action.
Despite these findings by the OPA, a full investigation never occurred, and the police never recovered Andee's belongings, including her phone, iPad, and other items. Lilith told us how people, including the police, seemed to dismiss Andee's case because of her mental health struggles and because she had gone to Seattle to be with a man. So there was this sense that her life was less valuable because of her choices. She's frustrated that even though Andee was an organ donor, her organs weren't donated. Since Andee's death, Lilith has been tirelessly fighting for justice and investigating her daughter's death herself. She enlisted the help of friends to find the truth and to uncover every detail of Andee's final days. Lilith has also become a powerful advocate in domestic violence awareness, using social media to share Andee's story and warn others of the dangers of abusive relationships. The attention and exposure that TikTok has helped bring to the story has brought Lilith a bittersweet form of solace. Though Andee's tragic death is what brought her the influence she once aspired to, her story can now empower others to recognize red flags and leave dangerous situations. We asked Lilith if Andee's story could help others in similar situations. What message would you hope that they would take away from her experience? And she told us, quote, "I would hope that people will be more careful. Don't cut your friends out. Don't cut your support system off for anybody. That never makes sense. That's always a red flag. I think that maybe if we had known a little bit earlier, we could have prevented something, right? But people tend to hide stuff. And just because you had a fight with someone doesn't mean it's a domestic violence situation. Like, everyone has an argument. So that's cool. But when you're hiding these arguments, that gets you in trouble. Because if we had known, I guarantee we would have fought to bring her back. We would have walked to go get her." This is, of course, a very powerful statement and gets the point across because where she was in Nova Scotia is literally on the opposite side of North America.
Yeah.
So she's just saying, like, we literally would have done anything to get her and protect her and keep her from a dangerous situation. Lilith continues to honor Andee's memory by educating others and hopes to form a support group for people who, like herself, are left navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one. If you want to learn more about Andee's story, you can follow Lilith's TikTok, Justice for Andra Adams, and join her Facebook group, which is called In Loving Memory of Andra Adams. We've shared a lot of resources throughout the month of October, and all of them have been based in the United States. But since Andee was from Canada, we thought that this time we could share some Canadian resources.
Great.
So there is Sheltersafe.ca. They provide information and a clickable map to help connect women and their children across Canada with the nearest shelter for safety and support. There's also the iHEAL app. This is a free, private, and secure app to help Canadian women who have experienced abuse from a current or past partner to find personalized ways to stay safe and to be well. For Indigenous people, there's Hope for Wellness. They have a 24/7 helpline. You can call 1-855-242-3310. This is a toll-free number. Or you can connect to the online Hope for Wellness chat. And we'll have more information on these resources, of course, as always, in our show notes.
Thank you again, Lilith, so much for helping us with this episode, putting it together. It's clear how much she adored her daughter and how much work she's trying to do to help others that could find themselves in maybe a similar situation.
Yes.
And of course, thank you to our Haley Gray, who's done a knockout, amazing, incredible job this month of helping us share these stories. And we couldn't do it without her. And so we love you, Haley. Thank you.
Yes, we love you. And thank you all so much for listening and following along this month as we've been sharing these stories. We know this is really the first time we've ever done anything like this on the podcast, where we have planned out and dedicated a month to sharing some really important information. So I'm very proud of all three of us, Haley especially, though, because as you said, she is our workhorse through and through.
Yeah, she's the best. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please share. And if there's one thing I've learned is how important sharing these stories are, sharing posters, missing posters, all of those things that families want you to share. It just means so much. And I hope we can all do more.
All right, guys, we will be back next week. Same time, same place, new story.
Have a great week.
Bye.